evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight here for this ongoing lecture series here at Paul Smith's College that's dealing with a whole wide variety of different issues as it pertains to our life here in the Adirondacks. A couple of things I just wanted a couple of people I wanted to acknowledge first. Terry and Jill for doing so much in the logistics here. All of our tech people that have come in and wrestled with wires in the last hour. Thank you to all of you, and also to our creative arts living and learning community over in the Saratoga Hall, okay, which has provided some of the artwork here tonight. These two images are prints from one of our student painters here, Mal Muratori, okay, who's just marvelous painter. Also, we have these little wood cookies here. These with the new logo here from our creative arts living and learning community, the leaning pine with a musical note attached to it, designed, forged, and burned, okay, by one of our students here, George Bisson. Is George here yet? No? Okay, he's an unsung hero here tonight, along with Mal. And then, of course, some other works of art here that come from the students. Here we're, as a College of Art and Science, we're interested in expanding the artistic footprint here at Paul Smith's College, and we're doing that with faculty members who are both scientists and artists, with students who are scientists and artists and bakers and cooks and all sorts of other folks here. So thank you to all of them for bringing us. Here's George right there. Just look at George right there. He made that. And do we have Val here or not? Okay. Well, we will celebrate her in her absence. Tonight we have an opportunity just to spend a little bit of time asking the question, what do the arts have to do with resiliency? Okay, I'd like to suggest that resiliency in itself is kind of a progression from the word sustainability. Okay, we hear that a lot in the circles of environment. We hear it a lot in the circles of economics. Of what are those things that we need to sustain in our life? What are those renewable, recyclable systems that we can create, as opposed to the throwaway systems which seem to be contributing to not only environmental problems, but other problems as well. Here tonight, I wanted to look at a couple of communities around the world that have employed the arts in the central part of their development, and maybe suggest a couple things that we can learn from them here in the Adirondacks. What we'll find here as we get a little bit further down into the presentation tonight is something I wanted to mention at the outset here about my own biography. Many of you know me as a college professor here. Yes, I give you grades. Okay. Many of you know me as a composer or a musician or a friend or a husband. Okay, or anything like that. One other part of my identity, which I think speaks to the heart of what I wanted to talk about tonight, is that I'm also a severe stutterer. It doesn't sound like it right now. I know for my students, I explain this at the beginning of every class, but as I'm speaking to you right now, while my speech sounds very natural, this is actually not my natural speech at all. This is quite artificial. What you're hearing right now is a controlled version of my speech. I am a severe stutterer, so right now as I'm speaking to you, about half of my brain is thinking about what I'm saying, And the other half of my brain is specifically devoted to controlling all the muscles that make those words in a conscious sense. Okay? If I was to sort of reach into my brain and actually turn the switch off, okay, it doesn't take very long before I would do that about every 3 or 4 words. So that's my natural speech. This is my artificial speech. I mention this to you because of this, because for me, before I learned this sort of intellectual control of the speech mechanism, the only time I could open my mouth without doing that was when I sang. Because for some reason, music circumnavigates this particular disability in the human brain. And so, as a little boy, when I sang, it was the only time that I knew I could get my point across to people. It was the only time that I felt beautiful, that I felt powerful. Some might even say resilient. And so for me, coming to this topic, this is not just a professional issue for me, but a profoundly personal one, okay? And one that even though I learned to use this control, music didn't become any less important to me afterwards. And I think perhaps maybe has even compelled me to see the ways in which music can serve purposes above and beyond just beautiful sound, but other ways it can support resilient individuals and communities. So let's go ahead and get started here. Joe? As I mentioned, when we talk about resiliency and sustainability, everyone expects us to talk about economics and numbers. There's this sort of assumption out there that if we have a resilient community, then everything about it has to contribute to numbers. And if it's not contributing to that, then it's simply not it's not serving its purpose. And the arts, of course, are one of those things which are often sort of put the feet to the fire here, okay, for arts organizations and artists to saying, okay, well, gee, you like to do this stuff, so why should we pay you? It's a question that I'm often asked, okay, for which there are many interesting answers, of which I won't go through right now, okay, but you can imagine some of them, okay, but let's just look at a couple of numbers to get this out of the way so we can go and talk about some other ways in which the arts make our communities resilient, okay, beyond some of the more obvious measurable metrics here, okay. Right off the bat, okay, if we look at our government's spending on the arts, okay, we're coming in under 1% of the national budget. I just got back from Germany, okay? Their arts budget is much larger than ours is, okay? Their tax rate is much larger too, but as my German friends say, we get a lot out of those taxes. Okay, we get theaters in every town that are vibrant and filled every weekend, okay, without having to scratch and have bake sales in order to fund the theater programs that are there, okay. As we look at this, one of the obvious questions is, if we have to have bake sales for our theater program, why don't we have bake sales for some of the other things on that list? There's, of course, many complex answers to that question, but I think it's still a good question, okay? And I think it gets to the heart of how we see the arts in our community, how we see the arts as a vital part or not so vital part in our communities. Here, the arts sector has contributed $763.6 billion to the U.S. economy. Let that sink in just for a little bit. That's billion with a B. Okay. Those are creative people contributing to our economy. Okay, and that ultimately, okay, turns out to be more than agriculture or transportation in some of the metrics that come through the government research. Okay, this other thing here, this 2.2 economic multiplier factor. Okay, for every dollar that is spent by an arts organization in a small community, we expect $2.2 to be spent in the rest of the community because of that. At restaurants, at hotels, okay, in other services in the town here. So when you buy your ticket, okay, to the concert or to the theater production, you also have to know that you and other people in that audience are contributing other things to the economics of the local community. But as I said, we can yap about numbers and all that stuff. All of these numbers presuppose that the arts have to justify themselves on the basis of creating money in the community. Okay? Well, these numbers show us that we can do that. So let's move on to other things. So what are the arts? Let's just ask the question, because I think many of us have so many different connections to that word. What's the big picture of what the arts actually comprise in our communities? Well, they may include traditional artists and ethnic traditions. Okay, in my hometown of York, New York, okay, down south of Rochester, my family had a large home that had a big front porch. And so I was blessed as a little boy to hear old Italian guys playing tarantellas on mandolins. I heard old Scotch-Irish fiddlers playing jigs and reels and waltzes. Okay, those folks that learned from their fathers, their grandfathers, these traditions passed along. I learned some of those tunes. Okay, even though my last name is McClure, a Scottish surname, yes, I speak Italian, and I raised my kids as bilingual kids, partially because I grew up in a rural Italian community. Okay, so all these traditions, all these things get mixed together and passed along through traditional musicians. We also, okay, have the fine arts, okay, that are in the performing realm. Okay, the performance of all these Gloria that the Northern Lights Choir did last year. Okay, the theater pieces at Pendragon Theater. Okay, the fine studied performing arts that are here in our communities. The fine visual arts. You can walk about 25 feet, okay, on Main Street on any part of Main Street, Saranac Lake, and you're going to bump into an art gallery that has gorgeous art in it. And I must admit, some of that art created by amazing Paul Smith's professors, okay, who make their living as biologists or other sorts of things. Also photography, okay, fiber arts, sculpture. We often sort of mix in our minds the notion of media, sometimes with art. Sometimes we sort of throw media out the window as being the sort of marketing businessy thing. Okay, it's all about advertising and making money instead of art. Well, just go back and look at the history on your browser, on your computer. Try to find a website that you looked at that was all words. You were attracted to all those websites because there's beautiful colors and shapes and designs and interactions. All of those are artistic decisions made by creative people. And then, of course, God knows here at Paul Smith's, yes, my office is in the Campbell building, which means when I'm trying to grade papers, I'm smelling what's coming out of the bread ovens. Here at Paul Smith's, we value culinary arts as well. Who who are the artists? Who are they? And maybe we make some assumptions of who these people are that are creative folks in our communities. Tradition bearers, okay, the folks that I mentioned earlier. These are artists that learn from other local artists, maybe family members, maybe neighbors, but continuing regional artistic traditions, fiddling traditions, craft traditions, all sorts of things. Formal or informal training. We have the fine artists, which come to our community with actual formal training as singers, as painters, as actors. Okay. You have professional artists, and at least for the purposes of my definitions tonight, the word professional I'm using for people who make money at what they do, either all or part of their living. Okay, as opposed to those folks who may be just as accomplished of an artist that maybe do it for reasons that are not monetary. Okay? We have academic artists, our music teachers, our art teachers, our drama teachers in K-12 schools. Some of them come from the finest training, some of them are the most amazing performers themselves, but in public, what we see them doing is encouraging young people to do great things. We don't actually get to see them do their stuff. Okay, but those are highly trained artists. Okay, also here at the university side. Amateurs, okay, again, okay, that's not a judgment on the quality of their art. It's simply meaning that folks who do it in a way that is not part of their living. Okay? Arts administrators, these are the folks that do all the very, very creative work of connecting the needs of the community with the artistic resources of that community. Anyone who says that an arts administrator is not a creative person, okay, I will take them to the mat on any day of the week on that particular one, okay, with what is necessary to sustain arts organizations in small towns. Artists are small business owners. They are people that keep accounting records. They are people that pay taxes. They're people that fill out individual small business paperwork for which those of us that are employed by another institution don't have to do. Okay, these are small business people, just like the people that own the local deli and grocery store. And of course, any of these folks can range from kids to grandmothers and grandfathers. Okay, there's no age limit here. Where do the arts happen? Another good question to ask. Well, public schools. How about that? The town where Paula and I just moved from up here, Geneseo, the local public school had this brilliant tradition. When it was time to vote on the school budget, they would put the voting machines out in the foyer in front of the auditorium on the night of the spring concert. So all of these people coming in to hear their beautiful children and grandchildren singing, they also came in and voted that night. Okay, public schools as not only places of art, but also places of civic art. Okay, showing how the arts bring people of different constituencies together. Colleges and universities, obviously. Local galleries, theaters, and music venues. Historical and cultural landmarks. Okay, the John Brown Farm had a jazz concert a couple weeks ago. Okay, marvelous stuff. Restaurants and bars, festivals. God knows the Winter Carnival in Saranac Lake is filled with music and art and all sorts of things. House parties, private residences, folks that hold serious musical events in their homes. And of course, we all sing at sporting events, right? Okay, sometimes we have school bands at the sporting events. Okay, those are artistic venues as well. But what are the narratives that define all these people? Because it's such complexity. Okay, my job tonight is not necessarily to simplify our notion of how the arts work in rural communities, but perhaps more to just make it more complicated. With all that complexity, how do we actually sort of hold that stuff in our brain? What are the stories we hold in our brain that tell us whether we're not going to go out tonight to an event, or whether we're going to stay home, okay, and eat potato chips and watch Netflix instead? Okay, what are those stories? Well, sometimes we say the arts need to be justified by economics. Okay, we can't be, the arts have to be like any other capitalistic endeavor. They have to be supported by the market. And if the market doesn't like it, then that artist should change what they do, because the market should determine what is good in arts. However, there's the opposite of that. Arts, okay, do not need to be justified by economics. The arts are intrinsically good. They should not be subject to the market. Beauty is beauty. And that should not be subjected to commercialism. Sometimes we say, well, art is just a personal hobby, and the arts don't create any jobs. Okay, so you do your job, you come home, okay, and then do your night, then practice your clarinet at night or something like that, and that's fine, right? But gosh, we're not going to talk about that as a civic event, because you're just doing it for yourself. Sometimes we say arts is a personal healing vehicle. Okay, certainly here, going all the way back to the Trudeau experiments. Okay, we know that art making has been part of the healing process. But again, that's personal, that's not civic. Arts as the economic engine to heal rural economies through tourism. Here's something that we're hearing more and more about. Geez, if you have small communities that are struggling economically, they've lost some of their blue-collar jobs. Maybe young people are moving away. The median age is getting higher and higher. Well, gee, maybe what we need to do is to get some artists up here to get some tourism. So arts become this sort of problem solver for local economies. That's a very powerful narrative that we have these days. And then, of course, there's this other thing, is music as a universal language. I would love that one. Okay, because I love playing like an example of Vietnamese rap for an elderly friend of mine. They don't always get into it, right? Okay, every piece of music is not universal language, but maybe something that is intrinsic in all music can be universal, even beyond those cultural barriers. And finally, okay, the last couple of things before we start looking at some examples around the world. If we say resiliency, rural resiliency, what does that mean? If we're being resilient, that means something is challenging us from the outside, pushing us at us from the outside, and somehow we are sustaining ourselves. Okay, my example of my own disability is a personal example of resiliency. Okay, I have to fight against that disability, and music has helped me do that. Okay, but in a larger sense, well, we might be resilient after natural disasters. Okay, folks that we know in Geneseo have worked in Biloxi, Mississippi for a decade, working with the community there that is still trying to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina, so many, over a decade ago, and that includes the arts community there. We are resilient against changing economy, against poverty, against brain drain in our small communities. How can we sustain ourselves as these forces pull our younger generation away? Be resilient against individual health, disability, okay, or aging, okay? To be resilient against personal tragedies, okay, when we suffer an unexpected death in the family. Sometimes the arts are an opportunity for us to reconnect through that grief into our community again. Changing cultural forces. Okay, God knows that when this new instrument called the banjo came around in the 1840s and 50s, God knows there were a whole lot of parents that were up in arms because this music that they were playing on the banjo was too loud, it was too repetitive, you couldn't understand the words of the songs, and if you did, it was all about bad moral choices and it was corrupting them and it's going to send them all to hell in a handbasket. Those were songs like "Oh Susanna" that we now teach in elementary school. Okay, but that was a big cultural shift when black music started to become part of our American musical landscape. Competition between local culture versus commercial culture. Gosh, well, why would you want to go out and go to the Thursday night open mic night, okay, with Kurt and with students when you can't predict what the music is going to be? Well, why would you do that if you had a choice to simply watch something that's entirely predictable on Netflix? How do you make those choices, okay, between local stuff and commercial stuff? And then finally, one of my colleagues down in Louisiana, who works a lot with traditional musicians in Louisiana, when I told her I was doing this talk tonight, she said, "Oh, down in Louisiana, we have a little thing about that word, resiliency. What a lot of people think down here when someone mentions the R word," she says, "is that's this nice little pat on the head compliment for those people that keep on doing what they're doing, okay, even though things are changing around them, but there's never any talk about actually making the change." Okay, and so resiliency itself, I think, can have many different definitions, just like artists and the arts can have different definitions. So with all this, what is the role that an artist can play in a community? Because this is where we're down to where the rubber hits the road here. Okay, where the bow drags on the string here. Okay, what does it mean for an arts community to be resilient? Sometimes artists are called to celebrate their local culture. Publicly go out and say, "Oh geez, I learned this from my dad, and so now I'm doing it." Okay, and to be able to make that interpretive statement to people that that's what they do. Well, their dad may have taught them to play the fiddle, but their dad didn't teach them how to interpret that for folks who don't play the fiddle, or for tourists, right? Sometimes artists are asked to do these things of celebrating their local culture for folks that are outside of that culture. It's not always easy. Are artists required to heal local economic, social, and environmental issues? Okay, we're often asked to be part of that civic dialogue. I actually started my career as a performer doing a handful of concerts with Pete Seeger, working with environmental issues around trash disposal back when recycling was a controversial issue. Okay, and so we often see artists and demand artists to be part of that social dialogue, social political dialogue. Sometimes we ask artists to help us heal our physical ailments. Okay, I know I've often gone into nursing homes and hospitals and played dulcimer music for folks there as part of the healing process. We of course know that music and art therapy is a discipline for which you study for. Okay, all the amazing ways in which artists can help to heal people in various kinds of ways. Are artists called to make, or are artists just simply called to make beauty for the intrinsic value of beauty? Just because it's the right thing to do. Not because it makes anybody any money, not because it heals anybody, not because of any of these other justifications, but just because it's gorgeous. Sometimes artists just do it for that reason. And lots of times artists just want to do what they want to do. They want to do something private. It doesn't have to have a public component to it. So all this, okay, so a question I pose, I'm not necessarily going to answer it tonight, but geez, do we ask professionals in other sectors to heal our economic and social wounds across such a broad spectrum, like we often expect our artists to do? It's an interesting question here for us to ponder. So let's take a look at a couple examples around the world, okay, of some communities that are doing this kind of work. Okay, so here, this is Keita in Ghana. It's a coastal community on the eastern side of the Ghanaian coast. And here, this is a school group, okay, that in their school, like most Ghanaian schools, everyone dances, everyone drums, everyone sings. It's not something that you do in the music room at the end of the hall. Okay, it's something that is part of the regular rhythm of the day. Okay, part of what it means to be in school is to learn to dance and drum and sing. And in this case, okay, we have brought a delegation of some Americans there to work with their school and their community on some issues. And so in thanks for that, the kids came out on the beach and did a little thing for us here. Jill, if you would bring the cursor about halfway through there. I'd like to start at about halfway. If you just click on the image and then you'll get the... There we go, yep. Yeah, about halfway through. There we go, yeah. We can get that sound working now, so... So here's an example of a local music tradition, okay, that is being performed, okay, for those visitors coming there, okay, who are working on a new kind of partnership. But it's a performance by those local musicians for the foreigners as audience members. We go to the next slide here. Here's an example, okay, where a local group does more than just perform. What they actually do is that they teach the folks that are visiting them part of their tradition, and then involve them in the performance at the end of the day. So we have the fruits of an afternoon of dance learning here, okay, by a bunch of American students here that were there. Other places, Jill, let's see if you can click on that and it'll take us where we need to go. Will that work? Okay. That here in this other village, okay, in Ghana, out of Womase, it's a place where kente cloth is made, and it's a small village. And how the village organized itself is that one person weaves the thread in their home. The next home over there makes the dye, colors that thread. Okay. Next family over there wires the loom, okay, strings the loom, and then the last family is in charge of the weaving. And so one local artistic tradition is now organized within a town, okay, where everyone is contributing toward the creation of that kente cloth. Let's go ahead to the next point here. So, but Ghana also has some really interesting questions about its sort of artistic tourism. Okay, because of course, as a nation that wants to build its economy, it wants to bring more tourists. And from a historical standpoint, the place that Ghana connects to the world is through the very tragic story of the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, Ghana is the home of not only the largest, but also many of the smaller slave castles that were the processing centers for West African slaves that were brought to these castles and then held in these fortresses until they were put on boats to bring to the New World. Now, it's a really, really complicated issue, okay? So, because on one hand, we have these huge monuments that are part of world history, but they're a part of very tragic world history. On the other hand, this is something that can bring folks in from the rest of the world to visit. Not only history buffs, but here in the U.S., many African Americans whose Ancestry.com stops to a certain place, okay, because of course records were not kept. Okay, many African Americans go back to Ghana as a way of connecting generally to their past, even though they don't know if their particular ancestors ever went through the Elmina slave castle or not. But it's around these slave castles that people want to sell trinkets. They want to have concerts. They want to do other artistic things around this because it's an economic engine. Next one. But of course, it is also a live place. It's not just a museum. Okay, folks that visit the Elmina slave castle also leave regular wreaths and memories for those folks that have passed through there. One of the most interesting problems that UNESCO has right now in places like Ghana is that they want to preserve these great historical landmarks and pathways in West Africa, but then how do you keep them going from economically? There has been an effort in the last 10 years to create tourist trails that go back the old slave routes into the interior of the country. Okay, so we as tourists could have the tourist infrastructure to go into central Ghana and then to follow the pathway that some of those slaves may have followed that ends up at the Elmina slave castle, stopping in villages along the way, stopping to eat food, stopping to stay there, okay, putting money into all their economies. But then a lot of Ghanaians say, well, gee, do we really want a whole bunch of Westerners coming to our town and saying, oh, it was your family that was enslaving all those other Ghanaians? Many of them don't want to remember this history. They want to forget it. They want to move on to something else. Okay, but there's this tension of how do we combine this history with economic opportunities and other ways that we can build small rural towns. Let's move on to Nicaragua here. Here in the town of Ocotal, yes, it is on top of a mountain. It's a community that is filled with coffee. Coffee growers, you get there by horseback. Okay, it's hard to get there any other way. Okay. Organic coffee growers in the middle of the forest. Okay, wonderful, fresh, marvelous coffee that they walk you through the process of how they do it, and then roast it right in front of you and make it for you. It's a wonderfully artistic experience. Also learning how to make Nicaraguan tortillas, which are very different than Mexican ones. Okay, they're much thicker and beefier. Okay, going into people's homes where they teach us how to do that. Here, this is in the coffee community where the women have revived an old basket weaving tradition of pine needle baskets. Okay, we don't think of Central America as a place that has pine trees, but we are high enough in elevation now where it actually has a cold enough climate to support pine trees. And so those needles that fall, okay, are then gathered together, okay, with strings around them and then turned into these beautiful baskets. And for folks that make the trip up the mountain, they get to experience the making of sort of smaller versions of these baskets. And of course, when they're there, there's marvelous intergenerational music, okay, of folks that are playing Nicaraguan tunes. But if we move from the sort of tourist infrastructure, now we can go into healthcare. Okay, well, artists, okay, supporting resilient communities through healthcare here in the northern coast of Haiti. Okay, it's some theater that they do to teach the proper use of water filtration in their communities, and it's the theater group in town that does that for us. But of course, here in our own community, we know how the arts we're intimately connected with healing and that sort of thing. If you go to the Trudeau Laboratory Museum right now, they have an entire exhibit called "The Art of the Cure" that is celebrating the artworks that were created by these people that came to northern New York here, came to the Adirondacks for tuberculosis treatment, and then created a whole bunch of beautiful artworks in the process. Many people actually make the quite believable argument that the reason why we have such a vibrant artistic community here, okay, is at least in part in the infusion of artists that came up during the period of the sanatoriums and all. Bella Bartok, okay, Robert Louis Stevenson being famous folks, a whole bunch of other folks that were craft artists that have contributed to our community. One last community I wanted to share with you, perhaps the most rural community, okay, in my presentation tonight, is McMurdo Station at the bottom of the planet. Okay, it is a town in which, for about 6 months of the year, there's 900 people. For the other 6 months, there's about 75. Those willing to stay during the 24 hours of darkness for 6 months. Okay, but in this place at the bottom of the planet, there are 3 musical venues that run 2 or 3 times a week. There are painting lessons, there are dramatic performances, going all the way back to the earliest of Antarctic exploration. Photographers, painters, okay, musicians have been part of the exploration of that part of the world. And I just love this backdrop in their open mic night thing that they have here. This is just a marvelous penguin here. Okay. So with all of this, we get some examples about how artists are supporting their communities. But how do we put it together? How do we kind of understand what it is that that artists do in a broader kind of way. Okay, and here's where we kind of bring things home tonight. As a humanities professor, one of the things that we look at is how ancient societies have risen or fallen. One of the particular models for that in the humanities is this thing called the king, prophet, priest model. What it says that if you have a viable community, okay, that grows out of something, okay, out of the Arabian desert, okay, or the steppes of East Asia, okay. What you need are three kinds of leaders. You need the kings, okay, those kings that are the people that kind of make daily things happen in your town. The trains run, maybe they don't run on time every day, but at least they run most of the time. Things happen. People make mistakes, but at least you get something done. You need someone in your community to make sure that those logistical things get done. Okay, the water, sewer, safety, okay, those kinds of things in the community. Those largely in this model are associated with the word kings. You need prophets. These are the people that look at what the king is doing and saying, well, you didn't do that very well. We need to come up with a new system to make that better. So prophets are the ones that are looking at these systems and trying to make them better, trying to amend a society, trying to lead it to something better than it was the day before. But then there's this last group of priests and artists. Because while kings are trying to run your town and prophets are trying to make your town better, we don't have to know why it is that we're doing it to begin with. Because it's a lot of work. And it's the priests and the artists that give us the images, the symbols, and the celebrations that give us our identity, that tell us why we do this hard work to live together in this place, to do this thing, to make this happen. Okay? That goes beyond our monetary interests, goes beyond our self-interest. It goes into our civic identity, who we are. I think largely in all of these examples, whether artists in rural communities are driving tourism, whether they're supporting healthcare, whether they are teaching in public schools, okay, whether they're doing political advocacy in some way. In all of these ways, artists are those people that compel us to think about who we are as a people. And I think in that way, that's where the arts sit in rural communities, because that's the point where we come up with those songs, those pictures, those plays that bind us together for a couple of moments and make us hold together when the tough stuff comes at us from the outside. This is a useful way, I think, to think about how our communities run. When you're sitting in a committee meeting tomorrow or the next day, look around the table. Ask yourself, who's the person that's trying to organize stuff, trying to get things on the calendar, trying to work out the budget? Well, if you got one of those people in your committee, you got a king. Look around the table. There's someone around the table that says, well, geez, you know, it's good that we're going to be doing things on Mondays in October, but gee, there's this holiday in the middle of October on Monday. We can't do it on that day, so maybe we've got to move it to Tuesday. If you see that person, you have your prophet. The person who's looking at the system, finding the holes in it, trying to make it better. And then if you hear someone around the table step up and say something like, this is going to be a lot of work, and I know all of us are busy, and we got too much stuff going on, but just imagine what this is going to mean to our town. If you have that person, you have your priest or your artist in the room. And what this model says, if you have those three kinds of leadership in any society, in any group, at any time, in any place, that society is likely to succeed. And as soon as you lose one of those leadership categories, it's going to be hard for that society to keep going very long. Okay? This is the place where artists can sit in any meeting in their community and look for those ways in which we can bind people together around images and symbols and songs and celebrations, for us to face those things that come at us that we are not in control of. Okay. And if we can do that, I think the arts can step up and claim its place in the development of rural communities. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Oh my God. I worked up to that big crescendo. And then, of course, I forgot that there was an Ernest Shackleton quote to finish up with. Ernest Shackleton, the great Antarctic explorer, whose initial idea was to be the first person to cross Antarctica. Okay, a big achievement, right? Big global, put his name in the history books. Well, his expedition to cross Antarctica very quickly turned into a 2-year rescue mission of his crew that got caught in the ice, and their ship was crushed by the ice, and it took 2 years for him to get his guys out of there. Miraculously, every single one of them survived 2 years of living at the bottom of the planet. At the beginning of the 20th century, okay, without all of the wonderful safety systems that I had around me when I was there in 2016. And at the end of the whole thing, okay, Shackleton was not a person who wafted philosophical very often. Okay, his books are very dry. Okay, they talk about navigation. They talk about we went this many miles today and that many miles the other day, and we saw this Weddell seal this day. Pretty boring stuff. But every once in a while, there's this sort of landmark of brilliance that just screams off the page with poetry. And at the end of his trip, where he had saved everyone, one of the things that he wrote in this book was he said, at the end of all of this, we had pierced the veneer of outside things. We had suffered, starved, and triumphed. We'd groveled down, yet grasped at glory. We had grown bigger in the bigness of the whole. And I think that we as artists strive to help everyone grow a little bigger in the bigness of the whole of our communities and beyond that. So if you read Ernest Shackleton's book, it's worth getting to the big one-liners, okay, after you read the rest of it. So thank you so much for coming out tonight, folks. Thank you.
By the way, there's an applied example of what you've been talking about underneath us right now, starting at 8. LGBTQ folks are putting on an open mic.
Oh, really?
I think they're calling it coming out open mic tonight.
Really? Okay.
So stop downstairs on the way out. I think that's going to be going on starting right now.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you.
Puts off a lot of heat. Wow.